It had been one of those days, too long, too tiring, the kind that made you wish for peace at the end of it. I had just gotten home from a grueling meeting, and wasn't expecting anyone to be around. My stepdaughter Lily was supposed to be at her friend's house. I hadn't heard anything different, so I figured I'd have the house to myself for a while, a rare luxury. I entered the hallway, kicking off my shoes, as I let out a long sigh, stretching my arms over my head. It felt good to be home. The quiet was comforting. I made my way toward the kitchen, thinking of a hot cup of tea to unwind. But as I passed Lily's room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I didn't think much of it at first. She often left it that way, but I still knocked gently as I stepped forward. "Lily, you in there?" I called out, half expecting the usual response of her being absorbed in her phone or video games. No reply. Curious, I pushed the door open just a little wider, planning to remind her about leaving the door closed if she wanted privacy. But what I saw stopped me in my tracks. Lily wasn't alone, and she wasn't exactly in the position I had expected. She was standing by her dresser, but the room was filled with an unexpected sense of rawness that made me feel like I shouldn't have been there. It was as if I had intruded into something private, something personal. My breath caught in my throat as I stared for a moment too long, realizing I was looking at something I hadn't prepared myself for, something far different than I had ever expected. She was taller now, no longer the girl I remembered from just a few years ago, but someone completely different, and my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. I quickly looked away, feeling the heat rise in my face. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't quite make my legs move. I had meant to apologize for the intrusion, but the words caught in my throat, unsure if I should say anything at all. "Sorry," I managed to say, my voice almost a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I just thought you were at your friend's house." I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, wondering if I'd done the right thing by acknowledging the awkwardness. Then I quickly retreated, shutting the door behind me. The house felt suddenly too large, and the quiet seemed heavier now. My thoughts raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. What was it that had left me so flustered? It wasn't just the surprise, it was more than that. There was something else, something that stirred within me, but I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. I stood there in the hallway for a few moments, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't know what I had expected, but it certainly wasn't that I had walked in on her, yes. But I had walked in on something far more intimate than I could have prepared myself for, a realization of how much things had changed, how much she had changed. I couldn't stay frozen there forever, though I forced myself to move toward the kitchen, but every step felt heavier. I was unsure of what to do, what to feel, or how to act. Had I just violated her privacy? Was it something I should have simply ignored and moved past? I didn't know. All I knew was that I could never forget what I had just seen. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the tea kettle, like it might have the answers to the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. My hands were shaking slightly as I reached for the mug, the warmth of the porcelain offering no comfort. What had just happened? What was I even feeling right now? It wasn't just the shock of walking in on her, though that was certainly part of it. It was this strange mix of emotions I couldn't place. I didn't know what was worse, seeing something so private and personal, or realizing that I had noticed things about her I hadn't before. She had always been my stepdaughter, but now there was a growing awareness of the woman she was becoming, and it was almost like I wasn't ready for it. I couldn't get the image out of my mind. Pitifully, she had stood there so much more mature than I remembered, so different. It wasn't just the fact that she had clearly grown into her own, it was how I had reacted. Why had I stood there for so long? I had always prided myself on being a reasonable, calm person, but in that moment I had lost my sense of control. It had felt like everything had frozen. I took a sip of the tea, the hot liquid doing little to settle my nerves. Was I overthinking this? Was it really that big of a deal? I was an adult after all. She was growing up. Why should I feel so uncomfortable? But the truth was, I didn't know how to feel. I couldn't erase the image from my mind. I wasn't sure if I should go back and apologize, act like nothing happened, or have some kind of awkward conversation with her. What was the right move here? What did she think of me now? As I leaned against the counter, I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. My breath caught in my throat, and I quickly set my mug down, preparing myself for whatever was about to come. Was she going to confront me, apologize? Was she even embarrassed? I didn't know what I expected when she appeared in the kitchen, but it certainly wasn't the look on her face. She didn't seem angry or even upset, just hesitant. She stood by the door for a moment, her posture stiff. But there was something softer in her eyes, something that made my heart race in a way I couldn't explain. "I'm sorry about before," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I didn't think anyone would be home." I nodded, unsure of what to say. The air between us felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. "It's okay, Lily," I said, finally keeping my tone. "Even I shouldn't have barged in like that. I didn't mean to make things awkward." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, glancing down at the floor for a moment before looking up at me. There was a slight redness to her cheeks, and I could tell that she was struggling with the same discomfort I was. "It's just I've been growing up, you know," she said, a little quieter now. "It's weird. I didn't expect you to see me like that." I exhaled, letting some of the tension leave my shoulders. She was being open, and somehow that made everything feel even more complicated. I didn't expect it either, I admitted, feeling a little lost now. "But I guess we're both just adjusting to things. You've grown up, I get that." We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything settling between us. I didn't know what the next step was, but I knew I couldn't ignore the change happening. It was inevitable. She wasn't the little girl I remembered, and I wasn't the person who had been used to seeing her that way. I needed to accept that. "I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to deal with all of this," I